Hey everyone, welcome back to the Foundations in Pre-Calculus 10 videos. In this video, we're going to look at Lesson 6 from Chapter 3, which is looking at polynomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So one thing that's different about this form of polynomial is that now we're going to introduce an a value. And just like our b and c values, a is just going to be a whole number that can be positive or negative. So say, for example, we had the trinomial 2x squared plus 3x minus 1. So here we're going to be introducing a number in front of x squared. So in this video, we're going to specifically look at factoring trinomials using a process called decomposition. And here's a big spoiler alert, but this is the exact same process as the product sum method, except there's one minor change. And there's only one minor change, and that's because of this a value. So it has almost the same identical 3 steps. It's just step number 1 is where we have one slight difference. So in our first step is we're going to rewrite the middle term bx as 2 different terms. So in order to rewrite it, we're going to find 2 numbers that multiply to get the product of our a value times the c value. So this here is our one step that is changed. Now we'll be looking for our a value times the c value, which would be, in this case here, we'd have a product of -2. Then we would find 2 numbers that add to get to our b value, so that middle value in our polynomial. So this here is almost an identical step apart from that a times c value. So then moving on, we're also going to see that from here on out, it is exactly the same steps. Once we've rewritten that middle term, then we're going to separate our first 2 terms and our second 2 terms, or the last 2 terms, and then we're going to pull out common factors from each. Once again, we should have the exact same binomial that is left over inside those brackets, and then we're going to pull out that common factor of that binomial, and then essentially we're left with 2 binomials that are multiplying each other. So we're going to do example number 1 from your factoring using decomposition section. So here in our example, we're going to factor the polynomial 8p squared minus 18p minus 5. So step number 1 says to rewrite your middle term using the product sum method. So in order to find out the product, in this case here, it's not just the c term. Here we're looking at a times c. So we're looking at 8 times -5, which is -40. Then our sum is that b value, which is here in the middle, which is -18. So then we want to look for 2 numbers that multiply to -40 and have a sum of -18. If you're struggling at all with this process, one way that I would recommend you trying out is listing all the products or the factors of 40. So I'm going to write down 40, and I'm going to write down all the numbers that multiply to give me 40. So our first one here is 1 times 40. Then we'd have 2 times 20, 4 times 10, and then 5 times 8. As soon as we loop around, 40 can't be divided by 6 or 7, so we're going to loop around, then we're going back to 8, and that's how we know to stop with our factors here. So anyway, so once you've listed out your factors, then what we should do is, we know that we're going to have a negative product, which means that one has to be positive, one has to be negative. You can tell which one's going to be negative based off of the sum. The sum here is negative, which tells you the bigger number has to be negative. So you're going to go to the bigger number side of your factors and tack on a negative symbol to the bigger number. Then what you can do is then add the 2 numbers together and see if it'll give you a sum of -18. So 1 plus -40 is -39. So that one doesn't work. I'm going to cross that one out. We have 2 minus 20, or 2 plus -20, is -18. So that one actually works. If you want to be a little bit extra careful, you are more than welcome to go ahead and check these ones out here. but you'd find that 4 plus negative 10 is negative 6. Then 5 plus negative 8 is negative 3, so those don't work. You should only ever have one set of numbers that works. So then we can say our numbers there are positive 2 and negative 20. So now we can rewrite this middle term. So our first term stays exactly the same, so I'm just going to rewrite it. Then we're going to change this middle value to have 2p and negative 20p instead. So plus 2p minus 20p minus 5. So this last term here just drops down because we didn't change it. So step number 1 is now done. So now we can move on to step number 2, which asks us to pull out a common factor from each of our groups. So I'm going to put a box or a little, if you want to call this a lid or whatever you want to call it, around the first two terms and then the last two terms. So looking at our first set, we have 8p squared and 2p. So one thing that we're going to do here is we're going to consider first the numbers, and then we can consider the variables afterwards. So looking at 8 and 2, the number that they have in common is 2. And then looking at p squared and p, those have a common factor of p. So I'm going to pull out 2p. So I'm going to divide each term by 2p. So 8p squared divided by 2p would leave me with 4p. And then 2p divided by 2p leaves me with just 1, so I can separate that with a plus sign. Then moving over to my second group, I'm going to look at what's in common with negative 20p and negative 5. So in that group there, we have a negative 5 in common. So I'm going to divide each term by negative 5. So negative 20p divided by negative 5 is positive 4p. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 is positive 1, so we can separate that with a plus sign. So then remember, if we've done our work right up to this step, this bracket here, our binomial, and the second binomial should be exactly the same, because then that moves us on to our third step where we pull out that common factor of 4p plus 1. So you write 4p plus 1 on the left side, and then on the right side, you're going to write what's left over. So you're going to remove 4p plus 1 from your first term, so all you're left with is the number out in front, which is 2p, and same thing with our second term. We're left here with negative 5. So ultimately what we have here is we have two binomials that are multiplying each other. And once again, if we want to check our work, all we'd have to do is basically just do the backwards process where we would FOIL or shoot our arrows. So just to quickly recap what we just learned is that when we're using decomposition, this is just a big fancy way of saying we have one small change to our step from the product sum method. And we have to use decomposition when we have an a value. So when there's a number in front of this variable that's squared in your trinomial. So that is everything here for this video. So if you guys had any questions, make sure to come see me in class, or you can text me on Remind 101. And thank you guys so much for watching.